I'm just so happy here I'm crying, or it's all those flowering trees. I'm not sure one of those is true, but I'm still happy. We're going to do moving from LLM gateways to a single agent origin. You can see it on the screens. If this is not your place, you can stay anyway. I'm Adrian. I came here from one of the farthest distances, I think, because I live in Malaysia for about 10 years now. So, and this is the second time I've been here, because I was here last year. So I was really happy to be invited again. And thanks for taking your time to come over here and try to warm up this room. So I work at a company called Tetrate, and primarily been on open source around dev prod stuff, and around portability and whatnot. And like everybody else, I'm doing AI for the last couple of years. You can connect the QRs to LinkedIn if you want. And we'll talk about the things that are going on in this space. I don't think we have to talk too many slides about what agentic is, but the key parts of this slide are going to be about this like LLM MCP intersection and how agents work around those things. And so when an agent's tasked with something to do, it uses tools, and that's the difference between just an LLM answering from memory, auto-completing text versus auto-completing actions on your behalf. That's all that is. And yes, I vibed that image. So MCP, which you've probably seen a lot of presentations fluttering about by now, Model Context Protocol, very useless name, really. It's about tools. It's kind of old in AI years because they're kind of like dog years, right? So what I've noticed when I'm looking from a services perspective is I was looking at like public services and like how is that an adoption signal? And it's been growing up pretty fast because it's only been like literally a year since you have a streamable HTTP, which is a way to expose tools in a way other people are likely to consume them, where you can have public SaaS to get access to whatever your features are. And about 6 months later, it started to grow up where you have a registry of all of these type of service tools that your agents can use. Everything from PGA Golf to Turkish Airlines and all those things happen. And rehosting platforms like Smithry and whatnot, an official registry. But now we've gotten, it's definitely distribution time because not only there are multiple registries, Docker and et cetera, there are companies who can sell you registries, StackLock and whatnot, as well as a very agent-specific foundation to curate all of this tool stuff. So if you haven't heard much about the tool ecosystem, just look at look for MCP and you'll find it there. And it's definitely an interesting space for public services now. Anybody here heard of Goose before? Goose? We got some Goose. So Goose originally started as sort of like a kind of like a ChatGPT type of front end alternative that would primarily focus on some basic tasks, and it got pretty sophisticated pretty quick, and the community caught on. It's originally built by the company Block, which used to be Square, like payments and stuff. And I used to work at Square, actually. Goose has been MCP since day one, so they were actually a kind of a co-founder of the spec, at least in an unofficial sense. And a lot of ecosystem around tools and things like it have grown up with Goose. So how many here have heard of this thing called Skills for agents? So more than Goose. So Skills, what people have noticed is that if you like front load a whole bunch of stuff in context or in some RAG type of pipeline, then maybe you can give it too much information and doesn't need all of that. So Skills is a nice way to break that down into components of a particular knowledge area. And there are companies like Tesla who even sell products on how to like skillify your stuff. Goose has its own mechanisms that are very similar to how Claude and others work with that. So you can progressively load knowledge into the agent as it needs it, so it doesn't get overwhelmed with all various things that it might possibly need. The other thing that changed recently is this thing called the AAIF, which is the Agentic Something Something Foundation. And that is a Linux foundation, which I feel like is going to be like the next CNCF, kind of, because it's kind of amalgamating agent-centric open source projects. Goose is in there, MCP is in there. There are other projects that are going in there as well, but those are the ones I'm talking about today. So one of the concepts that Goose created is that, okay, while you can sort of type in your commands and maybe you can create a skill and say you're going to use this and that tool, it can be a bit more specific in templated operations. So if you need servers, like very specific servers, and you want to control what servers this task has access to, you can actually encode them into a YAML. There's a GUI editor for this stuff now, so you can put exactly in there what it is that you want this to use and only what you want it to use, which is helpful. It's a similar thing about skills in general. If you have a task that is a bounded context and it only needs a few things, then sometimes it's easier to get it to work well if it only includes those things. The other thing nice is it has parameters so that you can pass them in command line or in GUI clicking so that it can fill in the blanks for you. So in this case, if you can't read it, it's just a simple flight search which could templatize the date that you're going to search for a particular itinerary. And I was using this example because Kiwi MCP server is a public anonymous server you can use, and you can also rehost it on something like a gateway. You can share these like any other asset that you might have. Envoy AI Gateway is an open source project in the CNCF at the moment. And it was sort of born in an enterprise context from Bloomberg and my company and Tetrate to try to handle agentic sprawl, where there's like little light LLMs everywhere, and not all of them have the type of capacities that you need to basically wrangle your token spend, as well as your control concerns. And in gateways in AI, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but sometimes you're not trying to like transform the traffic, you just want to control it. So you might be proxying Anthropic's API directly, even if you're not trying to change it to something else, so that you can basically have a unified observability or authorization proxying and stuff. TARS is Tetrate's packaging of this Envoy AI Gateway software, which is actually in the Goose catalog as far as an LLM choice. But the gateway itself is predominantly like enterprise focused. And when I think about like a single origin for agents, the two things that are concentrating here is basically LLMs and whatever your MCPs are. And when you have those things in the same place, then you can do cross-correlation, and you can use the same tokens or OAuth and whatnot to give your agent less configuration, and also you can give a bit more control. And there are many AI gateways out there. There's probably 2 or 3 dozen at this point, and many of them in the vendor hall. And so this concept is not unique to Envoy AI Gateway. There's plenty. Most of the things that say that they're an MCP gateway, I would say if you ask them 3 times, they'll also say, oh, I also an LLM gateway. So it's just like branding at some point. Sometimes people will say it's MCP, but it also does other things as well. And the main idea is you're trying to get the agent to a point where it doesn't have to care too much, where all of the user-based relationships of what people are allowed to use or want to use are kind of configured behind a wall for them. I would say that there's limits to that ambition. If anyone's ever tried to change a model, they will know that that's not really like a utopia. If you use a different type of model, if Anthropic upgrades from Opus 4.5 to 4.6, tons of stuff breaks. So I'm not saying like anything's really interchangeable. Again, a gateway doesn't necessarily mean you're randomly switching from one model to another. It just means that you're concentrating how the traffic flow goes, and that gives you choice. So this allows you to do things like mitigate all sorts of different auth policies that might be on the backside. So if you want to use, for example, GitHub and Postman and Kiwi all in your apps, they may have different types of authentication mechanisms. And anybody's MCP gateway will do things like this, where you give a front-end API key or bring your own key or whatever it is, and then broker the fragmented backend. And even though the backends are getting less fragmented now, I don't think this problem would disappear, because it hasn't disappeared with normal web services, and normal web services have been out there forever. So it's kind of like a normal gateway concern that continues with agentic stuff. So at the end of the day, what you're getting is like through a gateway at the LM and MCP abstraction, you're still getting normal gateway stuff like central auth, but you're bringing up some of the abstractions to AI level, because a normal gateway is going to talk about like requests per second or bytes in and out, but the spend metric in agentic is tokens, not bytes. So if you have things that you want to throttle based on amount of tokens, not requests, because you want to basically, anything that's a billing metric for you is what you want to be able to talk. And so this allows you to do tenant-based allocations and prevent like an agent from running away and spending all your stuff. The usual observabilities there. I actually did the observability stuff in Envoy Gateway personally, and if anyone's heard of Arise, there's a bunch of like LLM evaluation vendors out there. Arise has a product called Phoenix, which is open source, and they have a specification there to help you do quality checks on your LLM request. So it pairs the response with a request, and then you can judge them however you configured it, or even use humans in the loop for that stuff. One of the neat things with agents is that we have these long-running sessions and threads. So the idea of a session is there in just about every agent there is, including Goose. And sometimes you'll think of it as like a conversation history, or if you're in Perplexity, you've got all the other things that you may have queried in the past. And those can often be long time running transactions. And so this correlation duty, which can help you like track down what this and that had called during the process of doing work for you, is something that a gateway can give you. And it's one of the nice things that built into Goose is that it automatically sends like a session ID header on the wire in both the LLM and the MCP metadata that's going through the JSON RPC protocol. By default, you don't have to do anything. And so anything that can pick that up on the other side can automatically correlate and bucket your stuff by session. And that can be super handy for people who are trying to roll up based on a particular runaway thing and they want to know what's going on. So what happens is if you're a user using an agent and doing something like booking a flight, then the agent's just thinking it's talking to an LLM provider or an MCP, but it's using a single host for both of those access points. So if you see like this gateway thing here, you could just kind of yank it out and they could talk directly to the LLMs or the MCPs. All agents can do that. But you can also schlep that inside of there, and that can give you that proxying benefit and things like aggregating sessions together. Because otherwise, if you are using a session and you only know like the LLM side of it, and you can't see what the tool side are doing, you're not going to get the whole story. So that's basically what this visualization is helping show. So if you want to look exactly what it looks like in Envoy AI Gateway, and if you can squint at least, it collects, these are, anything enterprise, you can change the fields. So like anything that says enterprise anything, whatever it is, you can change them. But like, for example, you can have the HTTP abstraction, like the posts and the path for the LLMs, or the MCP endpoints, with whatever the upstream, which means whatever the service that you're talking to thinks it's named. If it's a token-based thing like LLM, how many tokens are coming in? If it's an MCP, what is the tool name? And things like that, and you can get that correlation for free without doing any agents or anything. So I'll just quickly show Goose. And so the one thing I'm going to show here is that Envoy AI Gateway, even though it's enterprisey, it does have a standalone mode that doesn't require Kubernetes or anything. So Envoy AI Gateway is actually a Kubernetes gateway implementation. So you can literally use it as an ingress for your cluster, but you can run this standalone, or AIGWO if you're Chinese, AIGW run, and then you can pass it just a normal JSON list of servers that you want. And then anything that you want, whether it's Goose or any other agent, you can just push that to the entry point. I forget why we chose port 1975, but we did for some reason. And that's just for the local server. And this is just the prove it slide. So I'll go over here using Ghostly, my favorite terminal. And so here I've got the local server running. So I just did that. And actually, I'm doing this here with it just showing me it's listening. Took a second to start. And then what am I looking at? Here I'm looking at a recipe. So this is what top to bottom, and this is in the AI Gateway repo itself. So I insisted as a maintainer of both Goose and AI Gateway to have Goose as being a quality check of the gateway itself. So this is part of the source base of Envoy AI Gateway. And so it has metadata about what it is, description, and then what kind of JSON struct that that the LLM should expect to create. And then there's some type information so that it can constrain that on the way out. Basically, it gives it more reliability if there's a JSON schema for what the LLM should provide. So I'll go ahead and shoot that off. So this case, the interesting thing is I'm just using localhost, even though the end traffic is coming from the Kiwi server, which I passed here somewhere. So this is a Kiwi's public endpoint. You can use it right now with MCP inspector or whatever. It doesn't require any authorization whatsoever. I think eventually they're going to reconsider this. So anyway, what Goose does when it starts up, gives you a little cute thing. It tells you the parameters that the recipe was loading, and of course you can use a GUI, but I'm choosing to use a terminal. It tells you what the model, what it thought that the provider is called, and this is the session ID here. So this is where all the logs are going to be clumped together with and all that. And then that's going to eventually run probably on a slower network than I expected. So I'm going to just let that churn. So that's basically part one. Okay. So part two, I'm going to talk about, which is what's kind of different, because I think this part is probably a little bit familiar. Maybe the recipes aren't. But what has been a big shift? I think the biggest disruption for the agentic landscape is people not wanting to pay per token anymore. So I can't say put a finger on exactly what date it was, but at some point it became normal to there it goes. It became normal to expect more or less all you can eat for a few hours at a time subscription to one of these big agentic companies like Anthropic and whatnot. And the funny thing is that they've all kind of agreed that $200 a month is a sweet spot for what people are willing to pay for a premium subscription. So Claude from Anthropic, Cursor from Cursor, Kiro from Amazon, they all have exactly the same price point. Now they have different features for that, but what you're doing there is you're giving yourself, not necessarily all you can eat, but at least that's what you're going to spend, and you're not going to overspend that. So if people are going for this type of payment, then you can't convince the same person to use an unbounded API key for raw LLM access. They're just not going to do it. So that's shifted the landscape from the back. So in the Goose project, we started getting requests not to have Anthropic as an LLM provider, but Claude as an agent provider. So people are asking, can I use Claude in Goose? Can I use Codex in Goose? And so it changed from Goose being requested to talk to an LLM and an MCP servers to, can Goose talk to this other agent? Because I want the Goose's front end, and I want to be able to control the MCPs and all this other stuff and use the recipes and the sub-agent functionality, all that, whatever. But I want to use this as a back end, and so I can control my spending. So, hey, there actually are not just the commercial big ones, and not just Goose. There's tons of things that do, can be an agent plugin or agent CLI. So probably a few of us have heard about OpenClaw by now. That's a special agent, right? StackPack is an interesting SRE agent, which focuses on like not trusting the LLM and making sure that egress controls. So like if it tries to call an API, that it's actually being filtered at a network level. But at the end of the day, these dozens of agents, they only have really two models they work with. They are either a CLI or an SDK. And if they're an SDK, their CLI is probably built on that. So it's not like a REST API call. They want to be working on your machine one way or another. And so at the same time that this was going on, you also have all of these editors and IDEs and things. Like JetBrains is IntelliJ and PyTorch and all these other IDEs, VS Code and Emacs if you want, whatever it is that you edit files in. Everything that edits file basically at this point has some sort of LLM feature. And many of them have agentic features. So they're in the same soup where like you have a front end who wants to talk to a bunch of agents. The front end may be in a pre-existing one, like a word editor or a presentation system. Or it could be something more like a ChatGPT. But in any case, you have a front end, you have an array of backends. And that was a big shift. And so Goose's journey started off as mainly a CLI provider and has become more and more modular about how interop works. So I mean, I was involved in the very first version of Goose when it was Python, and then it rewrote to Rust. I went dormant a while, started working, and I started working on this thing called ACP, which I'm going to get into. So ACP is actually kind of like a good and a bad acronym, because ACP, this is a second ACP in normal agentic, and there's also another one. So it's like everybody calls themselves ACP because everybody wants to be agent or agentic something. But this ACP was made for editors. And so this would allow two things to happen. Either you can use like JetBrains and connect to something like Goose, or you can have Goose use it to connect to something also like Goose. So you can have a Goose centipede. It's not just a small thing at this point. So a relatively obscure, no offense, editor called Zed decided to make a community specification for how these plugins work. And it's been actually pretty adopted to the point where Gemini, Cursor, their native CLIs have ACP options built into them, no wrappers at all. It's just in there. And so what this means is that you can keep whatever UI you want and swap the engine. And very similar to MCP, the protocol is similar. You have a lot of similarity in how the documentation, it's basically almost like the whole website was copy-pasted and changed from MCP to ACP. But the nuance is how it is tuned. It's tuned for front ends. So for example, this is a screenshot of JetBrains AI Assistant and how you can select all of the agents that it has. These are actually served by the registry of ACP itself, which has the binaries. So when you're in enterprise, a lot of times you're looking at OCI or containers or something like that. But a lot of times, editors just want to run a binary directly. They don't necessarily want to like launch a Docker container. So there's different nuance in how those things work. And it's not the only agentic protocol that might be relevant in this space too. I don't have time to get into it, but there's another one called A2A. I'm not sure if that's the right logo. I did ask my agent to create an SVG for me, so it's probably not right actually. But anyway, there's an agent-to-agent specification, but I would say the ACP is also designed for agent-to-agent because literally Goose does use ACP to connect to other agents as well as things to connect to Goose. So if you're looking at this visually, where would a gateway in a hypothetical world fit in? So if you have an enterprise and like we know that everybody's using AI subscriptions nowadays, but maybe you have some regulation, maybe you need to like have some pooling of accounts or what have you, you could imagine a gateway setting inside of there and either performing auth or maybe rewriting the MCP server list. So editors have the ability to like plop in with their UI elements what MCPs that this agent can use. So maybe it will go in there and like rewrite them to the ones that it's really supposed to use, or filter them back, or do whatever. The AI Gateway does not support ACP. This is a hypothetical world slide. What might it be? Another way could be behind the agent. So let's say that you have something like Goose, but you want to normalize the routing outwards to Claude, Codex, Gemini, or any of the other ones in a different way than they would naturally work. So one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at these is that they often use different names for their permission systems. So some of them call like dangerously skip permissions. Some of them call like YOLO mode. Some of them call like this and that. And you may want to have your agent just strip out the ability to have these modes. Maybe your enterprise wants to say only approved mode, or only sandbox mode, or only this, or only that. I'm not saying that's what you would do with it. I'm just saying that that's the sort of things that would naturally occur. And so I could see that potentially happening over time. And of course, basically anything that has any type of constraint has a rate limiting concern. So we probably are going to end up with the exact same buckets, just maybe not phrased in tokens. Maybe it would be hours of duration or something like that that could happen there too. So as this ends this half hour of rambling, I do think that it's useful to think about what your agent is using, regardless of whether you're using a gateway behind it. Like, what are the things that it touches? What are the things that are important? What are the things that are side effects that you should know about? And also know that there's different things out there. Goose has different ways to break down tasks and do orchestration, and there's many other ones. And this thing called ACP is giving us a choice to kind of like break up with your agent. So if you're having a bad time with it, you don't have to actually change your entire tool set just to try out something different. If you wanted to try out Cursor, or you're tired of Cursor, whatever it is, you can use these type of portable technologies to do that. With the caveat being that anything portable and anything specification usually has a couple of things going on. One, they don't cover all the features. You don't normalize everything. You normalize the things that you can normalize. And the other thing is anything agentic changes like so fast. So anything here you'd have to keep updating, even if you say it's portable, whatever's portable will change within a month. So you have to keep your software updated. So we're not at a stability point, is what I'm saying. So I hope this was interesting to you. I hope it was a decent use of a half hour. And if you like any of these things or QR codes, I tried to stack them so they could be scannable.